Hi, everyone. My name is Jacob. I'm a librarian here at the Metropolitan Library System, along with my coworker Haley. We're here to present Travis Hanson to you. Travis Hanson is an Eisner-nominated comics and fantasy illustrator with 25 years of experience. He has also successfully run 10 projects on Kickstarter and has a very highly popular webcomic known as Life of the Party. He's here to kind of give you an instruction on how to run projects through Kickstarter. Travis, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you. I guess the question, is what would you guys like to know? I mean, that makes it easier for me. It kind of guides me along to know what to say. What would interest you and what we think would help your audience best?
So I think a lot of people are going to be interested in how to get started, right? They probably want to know about the finances involved, if this is something that a first-time author can even do, or if you need an existing fan base. So probably starting with kind of the practicalities of it, the very beginner type stuff. I don't anticipate having too many extreme experts who are looking for the pro tips and tricks. More the starter stuff is my estimate.
Well, we're talking about authors, and
Mhm.
they actually have a greater uphill battle than cartoonists or artists or comic book writers, because we have images to show along with what we're working on, whereas a writer is basically text, and it's very hard sometimes for them to get their work in front of the masses to go, I want to support this. It doesn't mean that it's impossible. It just means you have to figure out how to change the game a little bit to make it valuable for you. Um, when we started doing Kickstarters so many years ago, one of the things that I did first was I was giving away my comic for free. I actually still do. I post it online so people can read it and build an audience. And then after I waited about a year and I had enough to put it into a volume. That's when I actually started prepping the Kickstarter and launching it. So I launched it to a fan base that had already been established through online viewing. And so, a writer, well, how would you do that? And I know there's different writing forums and stuff like that. And one thing that I think that we run into as an issue is we go into these forums that are populated by other writers or other creatives trying to do the exact same thing that you're doing. So it becomes even harder for them to go, you know what, I'll support your Kickstarter, but then I expect you to support mine. And what you're looking for is actually an audience. You're not looking for creator support, you want fan support, which is quite different. And so it's finding where you trust you can put your work out there without it getting taken. And two, um, what's your own personal drive? What are you willing to do? I know several writers that have commissioned artists to draw illustrations for them to help their Kickstarters, because Kickstarter is a very visual platform. You need to see what the cover looks like. You need to see imagery of the characters. You need to see, what's it going to be worth for me as a patron to actually support that project. If you got a question, throw it in there. It works for
Sure.
me.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, I think you talked about a couple of interesting things. Um, so it sounds like, and this makes sense, I've been on Kickstarter a little bit, that you really do need that visual component. It seems like it would be a very hard thing to do to present a purely textual project, right? I can't imagine too many people would buy into that. Is that fair?
Yeah, oh, that's a perfect assessment of it. But it's not impossible. There's a lot of gamers that they write and then they will hire an illustrator to come in and illustrate their book, or comic writers, or whatever. So it's not possible. I mean, it's not impossible. You just have to get creative of how you create that exposure for you. And there's
That's
plenty of other ways for a writer to get their work out, to get their beginning. They just have to decide what route they want to take. They can go in the route of self-publishing, which is an adventurous aspect of it, and be willing to pay an editor to edit your books. Or you can try to get it published through traditional publishing, which is a struggle in itself. And what most creators don't realize, artists included, the goal, they're like, well, I want to get published. And so they go through a regular publisher. They only get 10% back after everything's been paid for. So they're not making much money off their book. Two, they still have to do all the advertising themselves. They have to contact the libraries. They have to contact the bookstores to do these signings and kind of get out there and go to these conventions. Whereas in self-publishing, you're doing that already, but you get 100% back of the return. So you kind of have to weigh, when you start your book, what direction do I actually want to go into to get it out there into the fans and the masses. And I do admit, you have programs like Ingram or Amazon, which has publishing deals for people that want to self-publish their books, not have a lot of inventory, and start getting their work out there to build that audience.
That makes sense. And you talked about possibly collaborating with an illustrator if you're purely, a text-based author. How difficult is that? Can you find people who are willing to work with you? Maybe someone who just wants a percentage of the book sales, or is it really? Just describe that process for a little bit if you could. I'd be curious.
Yeah, since I do illustration for a living, most people will contact me and go, okay, I have a project, and then I give them my rates, and they have to decide whether they want to pay the rate or not. And sometimes, like with a lot of independent programs, I don't take royalties. It's a one-time fee for me, and then you can keep it and do whatever you want with it. So you don't have to worry about me as a royalty. I'm already paid and taken care of. But as that writer, you have to sit there and look and go, okay, what do I want my book to look like? And some people go, well, you know what? I'm just going to use my friend. I'll get my family member to do it for free, or whatever. And well, that doesn't always look good. So, be willing as a writer, put some money away and pay a decent cover illustrator. It doesn't matter who they are, just you find them and you find their rates and pay them for the work to create a beautiful piece for you to go, hey, this is the value that I'm putting into my book. I believe so much in what I'm writing that I'm willing to put a little effort into the artwork to make it look really, really well. When I was doing my Kickstarters, and I would set my Kickstarters up, and I'm about to do that again, I always put my own money into the Kickstarter. I tell the fan base that I'm going to invest $1,500 to $2,000 of my own money to help the project in its own way. So they see that I am just as dedicated as they are into making the project happen. And yeah. Go ahead.
No, that makes sense. And I think when I'm browsing through Kickstarter, I can be a very shallow consumer, right? And if I click on a project and I'm not interested, the visuals just don't catch me, I just move on. I imagine a lot of people do the same. So you really do want to catch them very quickly. And you talked a little bit about being careful with your material, whether you're a visual or a literary artist, and making sure it's not stolen. Can you talk about that a little bit? Have you had any experiences with that?
Well, I think, with the way the internet is now, anything that gets put out there or seen or in print or whatever has the possibility of being used for something else. We did a charity piece years ago for Stan Sakai of Usagi Yojimbo fame. And we found a company back in, I don't remember where they were at, but they had taken my image and several other images and put them on t-shirts and were selling t-shirts. And they were no way, affiliated with this charity book that was helping Stan in a time that he was having some, his wife was really sick. So all the proceeds were going to help him and his family. And this one company had taken these images and they were just using it for themselves. And we were able to get them to pull that off. And that's a risk that you're going to take regardless. But my belief is, and this is why I do an online comic, I give it away for free, I post art all the time, is you'll never know I exist if you can't see me. And after a while, your name gets built up and your style gets recognized, and it gets harder and harder for people to take your stuff. But you've got to put it out there just to be seen. The fear that for a writer, you have it even harder. You got to send that manuscript off somewhere. It's not like putting it up on the internet to be seen for all the world. You're putting a written piece and that fear, but you got to figure out how to share it. Even if you go into some of these writing forums and go, you know what, I'm going to share a paragraph, and you can copyright stuff as well. There are procedures to copyright your books, and it costs a little bit of money. You can find it through Google. What's the best way. But all that copyright gives you is a chance to fight it legally in court. But you also, if you can prove that you created a piece, if someone steals it or whatever, you can still have that first right of creation, and you can fight that as well and just say, look, I designed that, I didn't authorize this. It's a little uphill battle, but you're going to find that anywhere. And I've also realized, once I see people trying to imitate my style, it's like, okay, that's a pat on the back. You're getting big enough that people are going, oh, I'm going to steal that. but at the same time, the quicker that you can get a book in print, the stronger case that you have to protect yourself. And that's why I suggest with some of these writers, finish your book and publish it through Ingram, like self-publishing. Just get it a one copy. It'll cost you $25 to get a copy. And now you have a printed piece. You've got that book in your hand that you can prove. And now you can start shipping that book out and such. I have a lot of writers that in the beginning, they were very self-conscious about this. And they would say, well, you know what? I'm only going to write 3 paragraphs and I'm not going to finish it until I get this contract. Well, you're in writing for the wrong reason. The goal is to finish the story and then see what happens afterwards. And then that goes into the other thing. Why are you writing the story? A lot of people go into creating of, I'm going to write this book and everybody's got to read it because it'll change your life. This is going to change your life. Well, that's the dumbest approach to writing I've ever heard, because you're not going to change anybody's life because they might not connect to you that way. But if you write the book that you wanted to read as a kid, that's something that you would have picked up, or as a teen or whatever, and that's your focus, is writing the book for you or creating the comic for you, then the fan base comes because it's genuine. And I found that with the cartoon, doing Life of the Party, I write and illustrate that piece. It goes up, and I'm basically doing it just for me, but the fan base has gravitated to it. I know it's not for everybody, but it's found its dedicated fan base that's very, very supportive.
Sure, it's a passion project, and people can really, really see that. Absolutely. So yeah, let's talk about the finance side of things a little bit. So if you're starting out and you want to do a Kickstarter, you talked about how much money that you put forward into it of your own. What can people kind of expect in terms of that?
Well, a lot of it depends on what you're trying to produce in Kickstarter.
Mm-hmm.
I look to produce product. I want to have product for conventions. Since I have my own publishing little house, and as an independent creator, I want to have storage product that I can just go out, grab, put in a truck and drive to a show and sell it, and then move to the next place. So you have to look at several different factors when you're creating your project. Now, I don't have to pay an artist. I've got one that works for me, and I work him really hard. I don't give him vacations, and my wife says that that I'm a jerk to him at times. So I don't have to pay for an artist. When you're working for someone else that's creating a Kickstarter that's involving art that they have not produced, they have to put that production cost into the Kickstarter. So now that starts to balloon. And if you're doing like a graphics book or a comic book, you know, you could have $10,000 in artistic fees. So you have to put that in there unless you want to pay for that in advance and then hope that you get it back as you sell books later on. That's another, you know, that's a whole nother game. The other thing that you need to figure in is you have to figure in how many books you want. You know, what's the production of the books? I usually go for 2,000. The last couple I've had to go 4,000. It's just to meet the demand. And people look at it as a Kickstarter as an opportunity to get something first. I get this before it goes to the bookstores. I get this before it goes to a publisher. I get it first. I'm part of helping this project become a realization. Other costs that need to be figured in when you're creating your goal and make your goal realistic. People can kind of tell when a goal is not realistic. And you break down all your costs to it. But one of the things that you need to look at is remembering that the cost is going to be not just production, but shipping involved as well. And with shipping costs going up, be prepared to put that into your Kickstarter, especially if you ship overseas. Remember that anything shipping to Australia is going to run you 50 to 100 bucks. Or, you know, and that's extra. So if they bought a $25 book and it's a thick book, and it costs you 25 bucks to ship to Australia, you've got to put that figure that's got to be in there. And a lot of first-time creators, they'll create their Kickstarter and they'll go, oh, free shipping for the entire US and free shipping for this. Well, being in California, that works great until you hit the Mississippi. And for some reason, once you cross the Mississippi, the costs go way up for us. It's really weird. It's kind of that divide in the country. But it's the opposite for my friends in New York. You know, they go to the Mississippi and it's good pricing. And then once they go west, it's the same thing. The pricing almost doubles. You have to realize that if you ship media mail, you can only ship a book. You can't put in any kind of extras or stuff of that nature. And the USPS, they do check. They're not that dumb. And we've had books that have been shipped media mail that have, you know, in a big box that have been opened to make sure that it was just books and gone through and checked. The other thing that you have to realize in your cost is Kickstarter takes 5% right off the board. So if you needed $2,500 to produce your project, know that about 100 and whatever, 145 of that is going to be going straight to Kickstarter. So if you need exactly $2,500, then you need to knock it up a little bit to maybe $2,700. The Stripe fees are in there. That's the bank that the financial system that they're going to use will take 5%. So you're going to lose 10% right off the top. So be prepared to figure those costs in. Anytime that you add an element of, let's say you wanted to give a t-shirt or a mug or now you've got to figure in those costs, and that can get expensive. So a lot of creators, they're like adding all these wonderful add-ons, but they can barely publish the book. So now they've got to figure out how to publish all the add-ons that they promised. And the thing about a Kickstarter audience is they get pretty finical if you're not willing to go good on what you promised.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we've all heard stories of, you know, Kickstarters that failed or what have you. And yeah, that's definitely a thing. What is your opinion on stretch goals? Is that really even a thing for this kind of work?
It's how you work them. They can be really good. It's just how you do them. You know, we treated Life of the Party when we ran those 3 Kickstarters, and each one was over 70,000. When we did each one of those, we added stretch goals, but we did them in a different way. You could add them on. It wasn't required. So we would say, okay, if we hit, and we treated it like a game. I actually wrote it like a Dungeons and Dragons game. So the stretch goals were levels. So each time you would beat a level, you would open up the treasure chest, and then you would have an option to either add that to your package or not. It wasn't just a straight, hey, we're giving away an extra thing. The extra that everybody got was an addition or an improvement to the book. So let's say it was hardcover, and then an embossing, more pages, cameos, whatever it might be. That was something that anybody could get. Whereas if they wanted a t-shirt or a mug, or they wanted game maps or monsters or something of that nature, that was a different story. They could add that on for an extra $5 or $10 by the time the Kickstarter went over. So it wasn't forced on a creator, and it didn't, or it wasn't forced on a buyer. We just allowed them to add. And I think that works better. The game industry figured that out, and I like how they do those stretch goals. So we started implementing it into our books and found out they were far more popular than just doing the basic stretch goals where everybody gets a shirt or everybody gets a mug. Because I found people, I don't want the mug. I just want to support you, and I just want the book.
Right. Yeah.
So.
No, that makes sense for sure. So you've had a lot of success on Kickstarter, obviously. Have you had any failures or any things you really regret or that you would go back and change that you've done?
Well, I had one failure.
Mm-hmm.
And I, to me, it's worth it. Failure is nothing more than a stepping stone. If it doesn't work the first time, then you go back and figure out how to make it work the second time. And having that one failure was really, really good, because we had a very long string of successful ones. And that failure was partly my fault, because I kind of stopped pushing it midway through. It was just some personal issues that I was dealing with, and figuring out what direction I wanted to go in. And it was for a game. So my marketing was a little off on that, on how I wanted to approach that. The other thing that I think it did was it freed me from a contract that I was trying to get out of. So it kind of helped me, because we had people that were interested in buying the game as a whole. And I really didn't want them having the game after I learned a couple of things about their company. So it was a perfect storm for me to just go, okay, we could have a failure. It's okay to have a failure. I've done work for Kickstarters that have failed, and then they've gone back and been successful due to changes that they made. If you got to look at crowdfunding for what it is. Crowdfunding is not let me take care of a lifestyle. Crowdfunding is how do we create a project to build product, or to create something that I want to create. If it goes over, that's awesome. That's a great thing. If it fails, it's an opportunity for you to ask yourself, why did it fail? Take 6 months off and figure out, how do I rework this? Is it because I don't have an audience and I need to figure out how to get an audience? And that's usually your biggest issue, is how do I find that audience? How do I find my fan base? And that means in finding that, you've got to be willing to go out and start visiting places that would, pick up your book or pick up your stuff, get an idea of what's out there, what's selling, what's it look like. That's why I think comic conventions are huge. Take a weekend and get to a comic book convention and just walk the floor. You'll see publishers and cartoonists and artists and all these people making this work, and hopefully inspire you to go, okay, how do I get my project out there to the masses? And then how do I get them to support me? Just coming up with an idea and throwing it on Kickstarter, that's not going to guarantee a win. It's willing to take the time and do the homework and the effort to go, okay, this could take 1.5 years to put together. But when I do it, I'll have all my bases. I'll have the advertising ready to go. I'll start my fan base. I would have started a long time ago by sharing bits and pieces. Supporting other Kickstarters is a good way to get going, but it doesn't always guarantee success. I'm really picky on my Kickstarters that I support, and I support several, but like you, it's got to appeal to me, because I'm going to put it on my shelf. I'm going to play the game, or I'm going to read the book. It's got to fit, what goes with what I'm going to read. And if it doesn't, I'm really not into half naked zombie cheerleaders. That doesn't do anything for me. So I'm not going to support that Kickstarter, but I will support the one that's talking about dreams and fantasy and going places, that I can sink my teeth into. Which goes into the next thing. Who's your audience? And most writers don't know who their audience is. You know, they write, and this is a big issue. You know, you're writing and you go, okay, I'm writing for young adult, but you write it as an adult. So you miss how young adults think. If you've never lived with a 13-year-old, how can you write a book for a 13-year-old? I mean, you really can't. And it's the same with younger writers. They go, I'm going to write a children's book, and it's going to be this great children's book. And yet they write it as an adult, and they miss out, you know, what the child is actually, how they actually work or relate. A good friend of mine, he was doing a children's book. He was an artist, and he took his daughter, and they were taking pictures for scenery. And his daughter was 7. And so he brought a camera for her, and she took pictures too. And he said when he brought her pictures up, he realized that his view of the book had been all wrong because he was looking through it through his eyes. And when he looked through his daughter's eyes, he realized it was a whole different level. She saw things differently, and that's what she was taking pictures of. So he changed his style to match what his daughter was seeing.
That is really cool. Yeah, and that makes sense. So I mean, is that part of how you figure it out, is through feedback and I mean, seems like it would be tough to do, to figure out, you know, you think you're doing one thing and it turns out that's not what's happening at all. So aside from feedback from your daughter, how do you figure that out?
Well, grow a thick skin. I mean, when an artist puts something online, it's instant. There's an opinion about it instantly. Someone's going to like it or they're going to hate it, or the worst, they don't say anything about it. That's the worst. I would rather know if you hate it, then at least I know what's going on. Okay, this isn't working. Or if you love it, then I go, okay, that's great. But it's getting it, you know, the nice thing about art is, like, you know, you put it out there and it's an instant opinion. And so you can kind of work it and rework it. Writing's a little different. So you need to be in forums or groups or organizations that might have other writers that you can go, okay, this is what I'm working on. What do you think? And then the other thing is being willing to grow this super thick skin around you and learn to separate yourself from the piece. You know, as you draw, you know, when you draw a picture or you write a story, you're connected to it. And it's like, oh, this is my baby, and I'm holding on to it, and I love it, and I'm going to cradle it. And then someone says something like, well, I don't like it. And you're like, stop abusing me. And you're attacking me, and you freak out, and you realize, well, wait a second. And this, I learned many, many years ago. I learned it from my mom, actually, because I was getting critiqued pretty hard, and I was getting frustrated and angry. And so I grabbed my mom, and I'm looking at it. I'm like, read this critique and all this. And she's looking at it, and she looks back at me, and she goes, well, he's right. And that's not what I wanted to hear. But she then mentioned, she goes, well, what's more important? You know, everyone telling you how great you are, or the one person that actually can see where the fault is for you to correct it. And second, she said, not once was he critiquing you as an individual. He was only critiquing the work that you put out to be seen. And once you learn to separate yourself from the critique or separate yourself from the body of work, then you grow as a creator. Then you have the ability to improve, to become more refined. It's literally a refiner's fire that you go through. And then your work actually gets better. And so, you know, for the writers, don't be afraid to put it out there. Don't be afraid for people to read it. But be well versed yourself. If you're writing a book, when Harry Potter, sorry, big dog, but when Harry Potter first came out, there was tons of books that followed the same model that J.K. Rowling did, where it was a bunch of kids in a school, most were orphans, dealing with magical sources. I could name 6 series right off the bat that are just the exact same thing. And some were good, and some were just pure knockoffs. And so how do you create something that's different, you know, and how do you create something that's unique? especially when you see something so successful out there. And that's the thing of putting pieces out there for people to read first. And then you don't run into a situation that that the author of Aragon ran into, where people were accusing him of plagiarism of certain stories or whatever, because the editing staff that was editing his books weren't as well versed as they should have to realize, oh wait, this matches Tolkien, or this matches Brooks, or this matches someone else. So be prepared for criticism, be prepared to take it, and be prepared that if you have to make a change, make the change.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That's really good advice, I think. So we talked a little bit about browsing through various Kickstarters. When you're browsing around, are there any mistakes that you see really often? Things that you're like, no, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? Things to really avoid.
Too much text.
Yeah.
If it's text heavy, I mean, if you look at it, what is the internet? The internet's a visual resource. Unless you're already a reader, you're not reading text. You're looking at imagery. So you need to, the ones that have the less graphics in it are ones that I skip over all the time. And there's a lot of comic books that fall into that deal. They'll show maybe one page and a cover, and then it's paragraph after paragraph after paragraph of text. My thing is make it fun, make it enjoyable. If you go through and look through any of my Kickstarters, they're very visual. There's a lot of visual aspects to them. We break up the goals. The goals are all imagery. So we say, okay, this is the pledge level that you're at. You can see what you're actually going to get. We put images in each thing, so it's not a guessing game. If we say, oh, okay, he mentions that you get an extra book, well, we show 2 books, or we say, oh, you get bookmarks. And so the more visual that you can make it, especially in your numbers, use some graphs, show me where things are happening, the better off you are, especially when you're dealing with a visual medium, which is what the internet is. The other thing I see is they're trying to create a lifestyle. They're asking way too much. I know how much it costs to publish a book. I know how much it costs to publish 2,000 books or 4,000 books. So if you're asking $50,000 to publish a book, that's going to be 6x9 text and no artist on it, just a blank cover. You're trying to provide for your lifestyle. The other thing I notice is if you've never supported another Kickstarter, it's a community. So if you've never supported another Kickstarter, you really don't know how that end process works. There's a whole end process that goes with Kickstarter, and sometimes supporting other Kickstarters helps you learn it. It helps you see things that you would change. It might show you a different fulfillment company that you would want to use to get your stuff out. So that's a big one. Reputation. If I know who you are in the creative industry and you have a bad reputation, that's going to ride into your Kickstarter. I had a friend, very creative artist, super successful, made the mistake of asking for shipping after. He didn't even mention it. He goes, oh, we ran into a problem, so if you want your book, send us 20 extra bucks. Or you can meet me at a convention. I sent him a letter. I said, I'm going to meet you at the convention. I'll get my book there. It's stuff like that. Not being clear of what you want, or what your goal is. A lot of people aren't really clear on what their goal is. They don't know what they want. They run into the issue that it's like, okay, I published a book. What am I going to do with it? And great, you published your book, and now what? And so for me, it was more like, okay, this is just one project out of many. It's just, I know what I want it to be, so it's just to keep producing and producing good work. The other thing that I noticed that's kind of a real drag sometimes is how many people are involved in the Kickstarter. If you've got like 16 people on your crew and you're a company, that turns me off. If you're one guy or two, or you're a family, I'm more adept to support that, because that's truly what I think Kickstarter was for, was for artists to kind of, or writers or musicians, to kind of figure out how to get their work out there. Something that writers, I just thought of this because I use it as well, as Patreon, and create a Patreon page for your book where you can control who sees what. So if someone pledges a certain amount of money each month, you can go, okay, for a $10 pledge, you get a new chapter each month to read. So now you're getting previews, and that's a way to set up your Kickstarter because you're using another Patreon program to do that. So there's a lot of different things, but other turnoffs would be, you don't support your project. You know, it's just kind of like, oh, I'm just here to wing it. If you've had a project before, this is another one where you've done a project and you haven't even fulfilled that project yet, and you're running another one. That's a turnoff. There's people that'll do that. They've got 10 projects going at once, and so I'm like, oh no, I can't. No, you're working the system in a way that it shouldn't be worked.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense, and I think you're right. And I think customers are sometimes smart, and they'll see a lot of those things. You know, if there aren't a lot of visuals on the page, they'll say, "Well, you clearly haven't put a ton of work into this yet. It's a little worrisome." So yeah, that definitely makes sense.
Well, and
Let's
then the
see.
last thing is content. What is the content of your book? If you say it's a children's book, but the imagery is not children's related, it's all adult imagery. Or if you go, yeah, I'm doing a comic book for young adults, and it's full of graphic violence and hardcore, imagery that's really not for young adults, then it's, you tell they don't know their audience, and that's a turnoff. Because you want stuff that's, I've seen some great children's books about zombies, and they're cute and they're clean and they're fun, and that's a book, I'll read with my grandkid. It's fun imagery, it's goofy and stuff like that. But then you got the guy that goes, no, they take it a step too far, and you're kind of like, whoa, wait a second. I'm not buying that.
No, that makes sense, absolutely. Cool. Well, that's about all the questions that I had. Do you have any further sort of, I don't know, final parting words for all your potential Kickstarter peoples out there?
Well, treat it seriously. Be ready for the roller coaster of emotions you're about to feel. You'll go through every single one. The way Kickstarter works is usually your first 3 days are a boost, and then 2 weeks later there's nothing. That the 2 weeks it just doesn't grow, and then the last 3 days, if you're not at 70%, it won't grow. But if you're at 70%, it'll usually jump, in those last 3 days. Watch your time limit. You have 3 sets of dates you can put down. You can do 30 days, 60 days, or I think you can do 90 too if you wanted. But honestly, we found the longer you go, the worse it is emotionally. So do it quickly. Get in and get out. The best advice though that I would give is to sit down and ask yourself one question: how bad do you want it? Second question, then, after you've decided, because you can't tell me, I don't believe what anybody says anymore. You have to show me. Show me that you want to write. Everybody wants to write a book. Everybody wants to do this. Show me that you want to do it. Don't just tell me about it, because you'll be talking about it in 10 years that, still want to write that book, but I never have. Show me that you want to do it. The second thing is what are you willing to give up? And for me, family's not an option. I'm not giving up my family for this. But I don't have to watch, the entire season of CSI, all 16 seasons in a 5-week binge. I can take an hour out of that time and put it towards my project, or 2 hours, or whatever it means. It's just, what are you willing to sacrifice to make your dream happen? And then, with that being said, the last bit of information that I think would be pertinent is take a moment and find out everything you can. Ask questions. Talk to most of the creators that are independent are very open. They'll tell you what works or what doesn't, what frustrates them, what doesn't frustrate them. They'll give you advice, they'll give you opportunities. The more that you can gather information and knowledge, the more prepared you are going to be to the direction you want to go in, whether it is a Kickstarter or not. And Kickstarter is not for everybody. It really is not. I think that for some people, Kickstarter is not going to work for you, and that's just the way it is. For others, Kickstarters are a great, viable option. But be willing to deal with failure and rejection. I've got tons of rejection letters. I keep them as motivation. That's all they are, is motivate me to prove somebody wrong. And so that's, just start submitting, just start getting out there. I don't know if you carry this book. It's a good book to have in your library. Each year it comes out. It's the writer's market. It teaches people how to publish their books. And the writer's market will give you like 2,900 different publishers, and it comes out each year. So it is an incredible resource to utilize. They have an artist market, an illustrator's market, a children's book market, but it teaches you your rights. It teaches you how to deal with stuff. It teaches you who to submit to, and what that publisher is actually looking for. And then the other thing is just do it for you. That's really the best advice I can get, is just do it for you. Don't do it for anybody else. Just do it for you.
Yeah, no, I think that's fantastic advice. Well, thank you so much for coming out and giving us that presentation. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you bet. Everybody make sure to check out Travis Hanson's webcomic, Life of the Party, and check out our other LitFest options on our websites. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you.